Hey, business builders. We're back with another business builder camp profile. So Scott is a business builder and is building a business himself. Plus, he's married and has a son, and we're going to talk about that a little bit, I'm sure. So we'll talk about who he is and what he's building. But also, Scott is an expert, and I work to go find people that I can bring to you that are going to give you actionable frameworks and advice and things that you can use in your business right now so that you can grow. And Scott and I met, like 2015, 2016.
It's been a while.
When we were both studying with a guy named Taki Moore, who I'll often talk to clients about my time with Taki and what I learned from him. So we met there. Scott was growing his sales advisory business at that time, and I was also working on sales hiring at the moment. So we talked because we were the two sales guys in the room. I've moved away from that, but Scott certainly has drove into it. And do you remember we did a podcast together?
Yeah, you joined my
sales hiring.
podcast a couple of years back where we talked about sales hiring and some of the mistakes that entrepreneurs make and startup companies make. And you gave some really helpful frameworks. I still share that podcast with people. It's a couple of years old, and it's frameworks in there are highly relevant.
Cool. Good. I'm glad. Yeah, I've shared it with people too. That was a good conversation. So really, without further ado, we're going to work with Scott today. And Scott, welcome. What I'd like to start out with is tell us a little bit more about you. You're not just a business builder. You're an endurance athlete. Like I say, you've got a family that you're building. So you're a fascinating guy to me. And tell us who you are.
Thanks. The guy behind the guy behind the guy.
Yeah. Well, we won't go that deep. I like doing that
Yeah.
too.
Well, I mean, I guess there's business world, family world, personal world, like self world. So business world, as you mentioned, my company name is Sales Qualia. We work with specifically B2B tech startups out. Most of them, you sort of think about the typical technology startup that is trying to grow and get venture capital and continue to make a big impact in the market. As you mentioned, we work specifically with them on the sales side of their business. We help them build repeatable processes so that they can grow and scale and make an impact in their industry for their market. So that's the work that I've been doing. Started off about 10 years ago as a part-time, doing workshops on the side. I wrote a book, picked up couple of clients, advising them. And then about 5 years ago, turned that into a full-time effort, which is what I've been doing since then. So that's business me. Family me, as you mentioned, I've got a wife, married 14, coming up to 15 years. I like to joke with people. There are a lot of people who lost some bets on that one.
Yeah, good. Way to go.
Yeah, thanks. Really, really excited to have my wife, obviously, in my life, just because the thing that's, I think, really fun for us is that as our lives have changed, we've really gotten to be, I think, a lot closer to each other. I think that's pretty normal if you have a good relationship with any partner,
Right?
Friend, wife, spouse, whatever. She's continually takes on new stuff and challenges, and I support her on that, and I take on new stuff and challenges, and she supports me. As you mentioned, I have an 8-year-old son, so we had about 6 or 7 years of fun, couple do whenever we want on the weekends, and then we had our son, and our son actually was born on our anniversary. So
Oh wow, yeah.
So his birthday is our wedding day, our anniversary of our wedding day.
Perfect. You won't forget.
Yeah, well, we sort of joked that was the day he was born was the last day we celebrated our anniversary. So, but he's. I mean, obviously, I'm going to say he's great because he is.
Right.
Has his own personality, which in a lot of ways is very much like me, very much like my wife, and it's been an interesting ride for the last 8.5 years with him. And personal me, like self me, as you mentioned, I'm an endurance athlete, amateur, as amateur as they come. My goal usually is like find a race, get to the finish line, and do it as quickly as I personally can. I'm not out there to win the race. I'm just out there to challenge myself and push myself. So
well, and you sure do that. So I'm going. I can't help it. Can't help it. I'm going to include in the transcript here when we put it together links to some of the blog posts that you've done because it's just fascinating, Scott. You know, I've been doing a bunch of podcast guest appearances, and in my bio it says that I ran an ultra marathon.
Uh-huh.
And honest to goodness, almost every time when somebody says that and goes, "Wow," I think, yeah, but I got this, I got this guy I know, and whatever I've done is like nothing compared to this. So, Scott, you did. Well, I know you swam across Lake Tahoe. I
Yep.
remember, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
the width of
might
Lake
have swum
Tahoe.
across Lake Tahoe, but it's not that far, right?
Well, it's not as far as the length. The width is the route I did was about 10 and a half, 11 miles. The length is 21 miles, which is still on my to-do list.
Oh, I figured that was going to be next.
Yeah, it's on my list.
But in Uberman, which I'll include the links
Hmm.
to some of your blog posts, I wrote this down. So the Catalina Channel, 23.76 miles in 14 hours, 24 minutes,
Yeah.
140-mile bike ride the next day from Mojave to Death Valley, and
Yeah.
then 38 miles running in the desert before you decided to say, all right, yeah, that's enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was that race was sort of this weird. It was like a non-sanctioned race. It was a guy named Dan Burke who decided he wanted to put together an ultra triathlon. And so he came up with this course, which the full course was the Catalina swim, as you mentioned, is 21 miles straight as an arrow, but with currents and things like that. For me, it took almost 24 miles. Then you're supposed to actually ride from Los Angeles to Death Valley. After my swim, I frankly was pretty beat up. My shoulders were to the point where I couldn't lift them above my chest, and I had some pretty bad lacerations on my neck and my feet. On my neck because I was wearing a wetsuit and it just kept digging into my neck and shoulder. And then on my feet, when I finally hit shore, we missed the landing spot, and I ended up stepping on a bunch of very sharp rocks. So I had these like slices in my. Sorry for
Yeah.
being a little graphic, but
Yeah. I'm
so I actually had to take it. I couldn't do the first day of the bike. Instead, I did skip a day, and then I met up with the rest of the course up in Mojave, and that's where I did the last 140 to Death Valley. And then the run was supposed to be a 138-mile run from Death Valley up to the portal at Mount Whitney. It's the same. Some people may have heard of the Badwater marathon, which is ultra marathon, which is in the desert. It's that course. And as you said, I got to like 38 miles and I was actually feeling pretty good. But I joked with the crew. We kind of pulled over and I was taking a rest. And I was like, guys, I'm kind of bored right now. I'm kind of done. I'm over this. We've been out here for 4 days. I wanted to see how far I could push myself. I could go longer, but let's just pack it up. Let's get to the hotel and get some dinner, and let's call it success. And that's what I did.
Yeah, well, it's a great story. And I think that I contacted you when I decided I was going to do an ultra marathon. And for me, an ultra marathon, because it could mean so many things, an ultra
Well, anything
marathon.
more than a marathon, anything more than
Yeah,
26.2.
right,
Yeah. It's a
right.
long
So
way. It's a
yeah, it's
long
still a long
distance.
way. So it was a 50K, and which is 31 miles, right? And it was
Mm-hmm.
31 miles of rolling Pennsylvania hills, not it wasn't Leadville in Colorado or anything like that. But I'll tell you, it was a really great experience training for it. Got me out a lot more and got me building up the endurance to be able to do it. And then just doing the event, I think like the last 7 miles really sucked. The last 7 miles, it started raining and it was like one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other. But I think a lot when I run about how there's a lot of things about running that, well, I think it prepares you for life, right? When you do something hard like that, then you think about, because life is hard and circumstances come up, and when you've been through something sucky before, it prepares you to say, well, that ended and I got through that and felt really good then post finish. And same thing in life, right? And I also
Yeah.
think when I'm running, how sometimes it's okay to stop on a hill, but I always count steps. Like I'm like,
Yeah.
all right, I'm gonna walk 100, but then I'm gonna run 200. That's how I got through the last 7 miles of that.
Yeah.
I don't think I was running either. I think I was like shuffling. But
That's all any of us do after that distance.
Yeah. So what you like? You agree? Like, there's
Oh,
tie-ins to
all the
business
time.
and life.
I often do, I'll do blog posts or short videos. I call them lessons from the trail because, like you said, I mean, there are so many parallels when you're running a business. It really is your own ultra marathon. There is no, and frankly, there's really no finish line in a lot of ways. I mean, some people, you may have this, idea of, okay, when I get to this point, then I'll be happy or then I'll be done. But then you get to that point, you realize like, oh, wow, okay, there's even more to do, or I'm not as happy as or as gratified as I thought I would be. And so, um, I think about that all the time. It's like, keep moving forward. I have this thing in my office my wife got for me. I haven't hung it up yet, but it's the sign that says relentless forward progress.
Right.
And a buddy of mine, Kelly, who has been a good friend and a runner, that's sort of like what we always tell each other, keep moving forward, relentless forward progress. As long as you're moving forward, you're getting closer. And so lots of parallels. In fact, the time that we're doing this call, I didn't tell you this, but tomorrow morning I'm doing another event. I'm starting another event.
Yeah, and it is.
So and it's actually, this is another parallel, I think, to the business world, where like when you think about when you start a business, anybody, you think about that moment that like the business started with an idea. There's nothing. You just created this out of nothing. You curated this out of an idea. Like, hey, I see this problem, or I've got this idea. And then you start building and you turn it into something real. And what I'm doing tomorrow is actually not even a race. It's what's called an FKT attempt, called fastest known time. So in the ultra world, there's this idea of picking a course and then see who can do it the fastest. And over the summer, I was on my Facebook feed and I saw a local guy who had attempted this course, and he wasn't able to finish it for a couple of reasons. Made a ton of progress and just wasn't able to finish. And I was like, I didn't realize nobody had ever done that before.
Right.
And so I started thinking about it as like this idea. And then I looked at my wife and I told her about it, and she's like, okay, here we go. And so the route that I'm going to do is the Western States 100 route, which is a 100-mile ultra marathon that was canceled this year. It's the oldest ultra marathon course race out there, except I'm going to do what's called an out and back. So I'm going to start at Squaw Valley, where the race usually starts, go down to Auburn, where the race usually ends, which is 100 miles, and then I'm going to turn around and head back to Squaw. So it's a 200-mile course that, as far as I know, nobody's actually completed this.
That's cool. Yeah.
And so if I do it, I'll be the first one. But you think about it from the business world, it's like, I have this idea, and now like I have to manifest this idea, and all the planning, all the training, all the preparation, all the organization, finding a team, making it happen, getting to the starting line is all the work that goes into going from idea to actually making it happen.
Yeah. Wow. That's so good. I mean, and there's a bazillion directions we could go off on that. That would be very deep. But I'll say maybe another time.
Yeah.
But yeah, that idea of when I get somewhere, I'll be happy, or that fictitious thing we create in our mind about a destination that the only destination is the grave, right? That's all there is.
So the only two things guaranteed in life are death and taxes, right?
Yeah. So when you finish something, it'll be fun to see what else we can do, what else we can create. And sometimes we take a lot of, I think, detours, and we think, well, that wasn't the right thing, but it's all part of the story, right? And it's all part of where we're headed ultimately.
Yeah.
That's great. So what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about your business build journey, how you went from having that idea. Sure. I know you were in corporate and you built some of these companies to get to their first $1 million, and then to go beyond and have the sales team. And what I've always loved about you is it's like a engineering type approach. Like, there's a building block and here's what we're going to do. You're not the like fancy, sexy sales clothes guy. You're hey, it's the process, and we're going to like build it. We're going to do it. I love that, because I think
I'm definitely not fancy, and I'm definitely not sexy. So.
Well, I don't know with all these ultra marathons and everything, but that's for you and your wife to figure out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, and that's actually like when we talked earlier about like, okay, what problem I want to solve. I was a head of sales for three Silicon Valley startups. And in all three of those startups, basically taking them from zero revenue to the first couple million in revenue. And as you know, once you're around sort of Silicon Valley, you end up in this kind of world where you can see lots of other startups. You see some are highly successful, some that crash and burn. And in a lot of ways, the worst case scenario is where they end up in a place called what I call sales purgatory, where they like kind of get out of the garage. They have customers, they have revenue, but they're not really scaling to make the impact they want to make. And as I just through absorption and going to events and talking to founders and seeing what really caused the lack of growth for those companies, what I found is that they didn't realize, they didn't understand that sales was a process. It just, and that's the problem that I wanted to solve, is just like rip the cover off this black box that everybody thought, oh, sales is a thing that you're born with, or if I just hire an enterprise salesperson, then everything will be fine.
Right.
And it's not like that. It's a process, just like building the product is a process, finance is a process, hiring is a process, engineering, everything's a process. Sales is no different. You just have to know what the parts of the machine are and assemble them the right way. And if you do that, you'll have a repeatable engine, a revenue engine.
Yeah, exactly. So you help those companies, and I think for many of the people that I work with, many of us who have quote ordinary businesses like landscaping, I have a commercial fisherman, even a digital marketing firm. Many of us are bootstrappers,
Yeah.
and so this whole world of Silicon Valley and startup and getting big chunks of money is pretty fascinating. But you don't get that money, my understanding is, unless you're able to prove
Yeah.
it's going to work and there's product market fit
Yeah.
and all these things.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's where I think, there's this misperception that Silicon Valley is this place where you show up and you have this like 3-page business plan and have some coffee with a VC, a venture capitalist, and like, oh, here's $5 million, go have fun. It's not like that at all. It's highly competitive. And investors, and surprisingly, are actually some of the most risk averse people in the sort of Silicon Valley universe, because their job, like they only want to make sure bets. And even when they think they're making sure bets, their success rate is only about 1 out of 10.
Sure.
Like they know of every 10 that they're investing in, only nine are probably not going to get very far or just completely crash. And so, whether you're, you've got your own fisherman, fishing company, or a cannery, or, a dry cleaning operation, you still got to like figure out how to get from 0 to 1. There's a guy named Peter Thiel talks about this. Like you still got to figure out the fundamentals of your business. How does it run? What is the product we sell? How do we sell it? Who are we selling it to? How do we find those people? And until you have that baseline system, then you're not going to be able to actually go and get capital, whether it's growth capital from a bank or capital from an investor. So it's really incumbent on the founders of the company to build out that version 1 of the sales process, so they can then explain it to somebody else, so that person can then run it for them.
Got it. It is really useful, I believe, to do an exercise, even if you're not a startup company. I had somebody asked me the other day, a podcast host, what would I do if I had $100 million free and clear? Like somebody just handed me $100 million. What would I do with it? And it wasn't like, hey, would you go to Vegas and go have a good time? And that you can only have so much of that before that would get old too. But I really sat and I thought about that question. What would I do if I had $100 million? That is a good brain stretching exercise to think, what systems would I build? Who would I hire? What kind of help would I get? So I think thinking about that world of startups, that's a really useful place to go.
Well, I mean, a company is a company, and like whether you're a tech startup or like my company, we work with startups, but we're not a tech company. We're fundamentally a coaching business, right? So we're a service-based business, and I'm not going around and flinging business plans in front of VCs trying to score capital, right? I've got to bootstrap this business. I've got to figure out a way to finance it. I've got to find people who can take over core operations and sales and customer support and all of those things. And it's been a good lesson for me to just like, even though I'm serving that market, it's way different than the day-to-day for me.
Right. So quickly, because I want to get on to some of your frameworks in the book and the things that I know will apply to people that I work with. But quickly, so what's been your journey, Scott? When did you start Sales Qualia, and what were some of the building blocks? What were some of the challenges along the way?
So I mean, at sort of like the highest level, I was always interested in sales training. in learning. So when I was a first a sales rep at 22 years old selling college textbooks, I was reading a sales book every week. I was listening to tapes, cassette tapes
Yeah,
in
yeah.
my
Look at
car, going
yourself. That's
from
okay.
account to account. And then, in fact, at the company I worked with, they had me do some sales training for some other reps. And so it's like, wow, this is really cool. Like if I read this book, I can learn new stuff and then teach it to other people. I can get better. So that was always kind of in my brain. And it wasn't until, about 10 years ago, once, I established myself in my career and moved out to Silicon Valley, that I started running some workshops. And basically the way it all came about is I was the head of sales at a company called Altos Research, eventually became the COO, and I had to hire salespeople. So I had a couple of salespeople, I had a customer support person and a customer success person. And I'm like, I got to teach these people how to like do sales. How am I going to do that? And so I just started keeping an Evernote file of like, here are some ideas. Here's some ideas that I need to be able to train Jeff and Andrew on. And that Evernote file basically became a book that I self-published. And then that book ended up getting me a workshop at a conference. And then after the conference, 2 or 3 people came up after the workshop and said, "Hey, that was really good. Do you do any coaching?" And I was like, yes, I do. And so that led to, as I mentioned, a couple of like one-on-one consulting, coaching arrangements. And I was doing that on the side for a good 4 or 5 years and just doing a workshop every month or two at different startup co-working spaces, accelerator programs, and just kind of, it was like a side gig. But what that allowed me to do is just get really clear about like, what is it that I'm teaching? Who am I teaching it to? How do I even like generate a marketing list? Okay, I had 25 people came to this workshop. What do I do with these people? Like, oh, I should put them on a marketing list. Well, if I'm going to get a marketing list, then I got to subscribe to MailChimp. Cool. So now I have to learn how to use MailChimp. And those 4 or 5 years were actually, I think, really critical for me to feel comfortable stepping into this world of sales quality as full time, where I could step away from relying on somebody else as a paycheck. And because this transition was much smoother for me, it wasn't like I quit my job and thought, okay, I'm going to start a company. What do I do? I already had the core building blocks of a company. I just needed to accelerate its growth.
Nice. And what does the company look like now in terms of some employees and team members or?
Yeah, so we have 5 core team members. So we have a head of operations who helps with. She basically runs all the day to day, so that I can focus really just on coaching and selling. We're looking to move selling off of my plate in the next few months. That's like the next big step, so that I'm not actually
Big
selling.
step. Yeah.
And I think we're going to get there. Then we have 2 people, we call them implementation specialists. In our world, you think of it as like customer success or project management. So as we bring on new clients, we assign them to one of those 2 specialists, and their job is just to make sure that that client is taking advantage of the coaching calls we have and taking advantage of the client library and watching the trainings that they should be watching. So they're just kind of like joined at the hip to make sure those clients are successful. So we have 2 of those people. And then we have 2 people that are, one does kind of sales research work for me. So she's helping out with lead gen and lead research. And then Jocelyn, who's my executive assistant, who just like runs my calendar, does all the contracts, does billing, does a lot of the marketing work that we do. So that's kind of our core team. And then we also have 2 specialist coaches that come in and run sessions every month. One that just focuses on prospecting and lead gen, and the other one that works on sort of in pipeline calls. So I guess it's actually more like 7 in the sort of day-to-day team plus me. And that's what it allows me to start getting away from doing a lot of like in the business stuff and working on the business stuff.
Got it. What's the mix of business, or, how does business and family and your training for these events, how do those things all mix for you right now? How do you keep them in the proper proportion?
Yeah, I mean, so for me, I think the first thing is I have like an unbelievably understanding wife. So like that's the first thing, is just like it always comes down to communication. Like even this idea of like this trail run I'm doing tomorrow. I mean, that started with me reading this thing, and I look at her and she just knows. Like, she saw that look. She's like, "You want to do it, don't you?" And I was like, "Yeah." And so, but we talked about it. It wasn't like, I'm going to do this,
Right.
and you're going to have to put up with it. We talked like, okay, what is that going to look like for the next couple of months? Is this even possible because of COVID and travel and homeschooling? How am I going to fit the training in? And so we sort of talked about it. And a lot of it was on me to kind of build together a little bit of a plan where I said, like,
Sure.
look, here's what I'm thinking. Like, if I can get out on the trail every Saturday for a couple hours and do this, and if I can do training during the week in there, and we just kind of like worked on it, and we kind of came to this agreement where she's like, okay, if that's the plan, I'm good with that, 100%. And so that's for me always the first thing, because whenever I'm doing, whether it's like a single workout or one of these events, and she and I talk about this because it works conversely with her when she's doing her things.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I can't be out there, whether it's just in the garage or on the trail, with any kind of this. I get this weird feeling in my gut if I feel like we're not right. Like if I have the feeling like, she's like, she might be a little annoyed that I'm working out right now instead of helping out with dinner, or she's kind of annoyed because it's like yet the fifth weekend in a row where I'm not around on Saturday morning, and she's like hanging out with my son, and she loves my son like anyone else, but like,
Sure.
hey, when does she get her Saturday morning to go do
Right.
something? And so like we're always talking about that. It's like, and if there's any misalignment, we had this sort of sense, like I think a lot of people do when you've been married for a while. And sometimes I have to ask 2 or 3 times, 4 times, like, is everything okay? Is everything okay? And then she's like, look, here's what's happening. Here's how I'm feeling.
Right.
So that's like step one. Always step one is making sure that we're aligned there. And if that's aligned, then usually everything else can kind of fall into place. And because then on the business side, it's just a matter of structuring my day so that I get whatever work needs to be done, blocking out time. And in my calendar, it says run or training, and it's time blocked out in purple, so everyone in my team knows, like, hey, Scott's not available.
Yeah.
And because you're never going to find the time, you got to make the time. And from there, just then the final thing is just like going, and even if it's 2:00 on a Tuesday and I said I was going to do run or training and I don't feel like it, I don't have a choice. I find like this is the 90 minutes I have today. Like I can't just like wait until 5:00 when I might feel like it. If I don't feel like it, tough. And that actually really helps me to deal with the long stretches on the trail. Because if I don't feel like going to the garage and I look at the workout I prescribed for myself, I'm just like, all right, man, here we go. Let's do it. And then oftentimes I find once I get going, then it's fine. But that's, to answer your question, it's just like
Great.
communication with my wife, making sure I schedule the time, and then just sticking to the schedule that I set up for myself and being disciplined around that.
That's so good. So that may end up being the most valuable part of what we talk about, by the way. So thanks for that. And I think
Yeah, for sure.
you said that you guys have been married for 14 years and you've gotten closer, and that's how relationships are. Well, like, look, we both know that is not necessarily how relationships are. There's lots of them where no, that isn't what happens at all. And no, they don't talk about the discomfort feeling that they're getting that tells them they're out of alignment. I really do understand, thankfully, what you're talking about, but that's come through a lot of hard work with Catherine and I working through tough situations, and it's come through proactively sitting down at certain times throughout the year and writing down what's going on with each of the children, and what does she need, and what does she want to do, and what's important to her, what's important to me, and then our calendar time where we meet and take a look at the calendar for the week is so important. And having a written annual calendar for the family, which quite frankly got thrown up in the air with like coronavirus
Shocking
this year, but it's okay. It's all good. But yeah, if we don't have those times to get centered together, then the train comes off the tracks, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing you said that I really love is I have purple blocks in my calendar too. But purple blocks for me are in between appointments. I put a purple block in for some buffer space so that I'm not running back to back on calls.
Yep.
And like you, that's how, if I want to create like being in a race, I just have to block that time out and have a grid of the training I plan to do. Or otherwise it doesn't get done. And I think you're pretty extreme, and yet the same thing would apply if somebody registers for a 5K and they commit to like from the couch to the 5K type of a training plan, right? And that's really great too. Like nobody needs to feel like they need to be Scott and go do the Uberman or the
I'm glad you say that, because a lot of times people, like you said, you're like, oh, people read that I've done an ultra marathon, and you should, like, oh, you should talk to this guy. Well, I feel the same way. I'm like, you think I'm crazy? Like, you should talk to these other guys. Like, I'm watching the world's toughest
There's always
race,
somebody, right? There's
right?
always
There's always somebody
somebody.
who's a little crazier,
Yeah.
or does a little bit more. And I think that's where I've heard this quote. I think I first heard it from Tim Ferriss, where comparison is the thief of joy. And, I've had people say like, man, I could never do 200 miles. And I'm like, well, so what? No, you don't have to do 200-mile races to like be good with yourself. I remember watching a local 5K a couple of years ago. I was just happened to be at a playground with my son, and this 5K was wrapping up. And I remember seeing these people like kind of like suffering to finish, and they were just kind of like plodding along. And I thought to myself, and for some reason this gets me kind of emotional when I think about it. It's
Me
like,
too.
for some of those people, that might have been their first 5K. Like, you don't know, maybe it was like a mom who had 3 kids, and finally after 15 years of raising kids decided like, I'm going to go out and run a 5K. And that's like the equivalent of me doing 200 miles. It could be somebody who is now cancer free after, months of leukemia treatment, right? And radiation. Like, oh my gosh, I can be outside, I can walk, right?
Yeah.
It could have been somebody recovering from surgery. Like, you don't know who people are. And I tell my sons that all the time. I'm like, when you look at somebody, you just don't know what they've been through or what they're going through. So, you never want to just look at like, oh, it's only a 5K. I'm like, for some of those people, that 5K is everything.
Yeah.
It's never just a 5K.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that. You're a good dude.
Thanks, Ben.
And there's lots of other things. Like there's so many other things in life too, that it could be intentionally creating relationship with our spouse and scheduling that time to sit down and talk about priorities together and listen. Or it could be starting a yoga habit or spirituality. There's just so many things where we
Yeah.
can start small and like do the Steve Chandler is a coach I worked with who calls it doing the doable. Just do the doable.
Yeah.
That's
It's like
heroic
baby
too.
steps, right? It's just
Yeah.
like break it down into smaller and smaller chunks. Like, again, like going back to the lessons from the trail, it's like, okay, yeah, it's 200 miles, but there's no way I can think about it as 200 miles. The thing I'm thinking most about is like, I just want to get over the first 3.5 miles because it's a big climb up over to the top of Squaw. And I'm like, if I get there, then I'm like, now I've started, right? And now I've got this downhill section for 5 miles. And then after that, I'm 10 miles in, or roughly. And then I'm like, okay, now I can take a break. And then I know the next section is a little bit uphill. Okay, 5 more miles. And then 15 miles after that, I get to see my wife because she's going to meet me at that point.
Yeah.
I'm going to hang out with her and have lunch. And she's going to hike 1.5 miles with my son, part of the course, because it's uphill. So you have to keep breaking it down, like you said, to do the doable, and look for those little things. Like, I did this just yesterday. We usually have somebody who comes by and helps out with my son in the afternoons. He does homeschooling in the morning. Then in the afternoon, this woman comes by and helps out. But Wednesday, she's not available. So that's like the day my wife and I really have to like be a lot more flexible. And we had this gap of time. He was done homeschooling at 11, and my wife was out doing. She's a PhD economist, research economist, but she's also a flight instructor. She teaches people to fly airplanes.
Wow, is that all?
So and that's her ultra running is like her flying. Her flying is like the equivalent. And so she's like, listen, I got a lesson from 10 to 12. I'll be back around 12:15. So my son finishes around 11. She's going to be back around 12:15. We have this hour. And I'm like, then my son, I didn't want him to do like more screen time. But on the other hand, I'm thinking my brain's getting pulled back into the home office. I'm like, well, what do I do? And I've been working on this, trying to be more present. And I told myself, you know what? I'm just going to like hang out. It's like, it sounds like, well, why wouldn't you want to hang out with your kid? But I think a lot of us, you just get so absorbed in business. You're trying
I
to run
get
a
it.
company and you're like, I got bills to pay and clients are pissed and clients are happy, like whatever. And I was like, my win today, I'm like, I'm going to spend this hour with him and hang out because it's going to be worth it. And we ended up doing Halloween stuff. And we created this like scarecrow. We stuffed old clothes with paper. We put it outside. We hung some Halloween lights. We did that. And then later on in the day, we went rock climbing in the afternoon, which I had a reservation. We did that. After that, we went and got a hot dog. After that, we came home, and it ended up being almost like a Saturday. And I was like, yeah, I had some work stuff backed up. But when I logged on this morning, I'm like, I actually wasn't that backed up.
Sure.
And I felt really good about that day yesterday. It was just like a really good opportunity for me to spend all that time with him that I haven't always spent with him, and it meant a lot to him because like Halloween's rough right now. He's like, we're going to be able to go trick or treating. He's 8 years old. You know, it's like
Sure.
Halloween's bigger than Christmas for an 8-year-old,
Right.
you know, or as big. And I was like, if we just create this like Halloween day, it's probably going to be big for him. And it was. We just had a really great day. And I'm fortunate that I'm in a situation where I have enough team where I could say, hey, I'm not going to be around.
Mhm.
But even if I wasn't, I kind of feel like I think most people could probably just find that hour and just check out and do that kind of stuff. And so for me, that was doing the doable. And I felt really good about it.
So I don't think that sounds crazy at all. I think a whole lot of people can identify with that. It's like a feeling. There's resistance to spending that time with our kids, and I think it's good to verbalize that and say, yeah, like I feel that too. I totally get it, Scott. And what normally happens to me is if I sit down with my little Molly, who's 9, to play on the floor and play memory, which is something we did last night, I feel the resistance to sitting there
Yeah.
with her and doing that rather than working. But then whenever I go through the first couple, like I can feel the transition happening.
Yeah.
And as soon as it happens, then I'm present with her and I'm like, wow, why was
Yeah.
I having that resistance? But
Totally.
then it's good. It's just good, like
Yeah.
viscerally good.
Yeah. And it makes me feel better about the time I am working and I'm not available. Or like this weekend, I'm going to be on, the trail all weekend. He gets to follow me around in the truck with my wife and, be crew. And that's probably not his favorite thing to do. I mean, she makes it fun. And
Right.
once we get out there, he usually has a good time. But he's kind of excited because once I told him like nobody's done this route before. If I do it, I'll be the first one. He said,
You're
"Well, it's
his
kind of like
hero,
a
man.
well, I don't know about that, but
You're his hero for sure. Without a doubt. Not
you don't
because
see
of
the
what
day
you
to day.
do, right? That's the other thing. Not because of what you do, not because you're going to go run this thing, because you're his dad, you're his hero. That's
Yeah,
it. Like I've come to realize that. It's bestowed upon us, and the only thing we can do is like screw it up. But you're his hero. So I want to, wow, I don't regret having spent this time talking about these things at all. So thanks. I want to talk a little bit about what you do professionally and being an expert in the work that you put out in the. So Scott, thanks for spending
yeah,
time talking about family. I don't regret any of that time that we spent because it's just so important, and it's good to talk to another guy who's trying to live their best life about how they balance and how they do these things. But I
thanks.
want to talk a little bit about Scott
Sure.
as expert, and I want to talk
Okay.
about the work that you do. So you sent me, hey, thanks for sending me a copy of your
Yeah,
latest book, Stop Hustling and Start Scaling, right?
yeah,
And we'll put a link in the notes to that, but I just want to give my endorsement. Like, wow, I read the introduction and I was like making notes and writing in the margin. There's just books like that. And again,
thank you.
it goes back to, I just really appreciate your like from the ground up, let's talk about what really matters, step by step type of
Mhm.
style. And that's what's in the book. So I think where I wanted to go with this today is there's a lot of people that I work with where they're not so much startups, but maybe the owner has been selling for a while. The owner's been the
Yeah,
primary one selling, and they've got I'll say they've got like owner's advantage. They've got founder's advantage. It's their
yeah,
company. They can make decisions. But when it's time to start thinking about either automating some of the sales process with some videos
hmm,
and a progression and funnels or things like
yeah,
that, or when they go to hire people, then it gets harder because now they have somebody that is going out there in a role to sell. And I think your process and framework of starting with like what's really the problem you solve, I think
hmm.
that framework will be really helpful to people. So I hope maybe you
Well,
can share a couple frameworks, and then I'll put
yeah,
them in the notes and link to your book, and that'll really serve people.
yeah. I mean, so we could sort of talk about frameworks from a like general sales process standpoint, or we could also talk about it in terms of how do I get out of doing the day-to-day selling end to end. Which of those would be more useful in the time that we have?
But why don't you work on sales process and
Okay.
those frameworks? That'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, the premise of the book, the subtitle is Actually, I always forget. This is one of those things when you write a book, you're like, what did I write in there?
Yeah,
The
you're right about
subtitle is ramp. I want to get it right. Ramp up your B2B startups, repeatable revenue with the Q framework. So the Q framework is, the Q stands for questions. And so each chapter in the book is a different question in that framework. And there's 7 basic questions that you need to be able to ask and answer in order to build out kind of that version 1 of a repeatable sales process. And so I'll just go through the 7 questions, and then if people want to grab a copy of the book to kind of dig into it a little bit more.
That's great.
The first one, as you mentioned, is like, what problem are you solving? And so from a selling standpoint, I always tell people, look, no problem, no sale. It doesn't matter if they're interested. It doesn't matter if they want to learn more. It doesn't matter if they want a brochure or a pamphlet or have a call or see a demo, whatever it is. Like, you got to find that there's a problem with the person you're talking to that you can solve, because if you don't, there's no sale. And then the second 2 questions are which and who, meaning which segment of the marketplace are you targeting? So like, sometimes people think of it as a segment or a niche or a vertical. Like, who is the best kind of customer that you're going after? Because that's important from a focus standpoint. And then the second question there is who are the buyers, meaning who are the people that make the decisions at those companies that we know we're going to have to talk to and sell to in order to get a deal. So the what, which, and who, that's kind of like everything around the top of your selling funnel. Like, who has, like, what's the problem we solve? Who do we solve it for? How do I go find those people and generate conversations to see if they're interested in what we do?
Great.
You
So
can pause there. Does that make sense?
yeah, for sure. And when I read the book, what I didn't read the whole book, but the part about the problem that I read, you included that you often ask founders what problem they solve, and then they end up talking about the features and what
Or the
they're
product,
building,
yeah.
what it looks like. So we have a hard time as humans sometimes really answering the question that is asked. So I pictured you asking people and them not really
Yeah.
being ready or able to even hear your question thoroughly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and I think, whatever the small business is, I'm like, if you, Wayne, were to give me an example of, a small business that's not a tech startup, like throw anyone at me right now.
A business that sells labels for cosmetics, the labels that get stuck on an industrial processing facility, they come on a roll and ka-chunk, 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 the labels
Yeah.
get put on there.
Yeah. So perfect example of where I think from a selling standpoint, it would be easy to fall into the trap of saying, hey, we build labels or we make labels that you can put on. And this is how the labels are made. And this is why our labels are better than everyone else's. And that's a product-led sale in a lot of ways. But if you think about what is the real problem that you're solving there, it's probably thinking about the idea that cosmetic company doesn't have to build the labels on their own. It would be a cost center for them. They don't have the facilities, they don't have the equipment. If they have to make a quick change because they change the ingredients, do they have a partner that can change the labels really quickly? What's the quality of those labels, and to make sure that they don't peel off so that they don't get sued, those kinds of things. So you have to really think about, okay, so if I'm going to go talk to these cosmetic manufacturers, what is it about the labels that, like, why would that be a problem for them? So much so that they're looking to outsource it to somebody like us. And if you can really understand the business case behind it, that's really driving why they would want to outsource this in the first place, then you can just sort of assume that if your label solves that problem, you're going to be way farther along on executing on the sale than you would have been otherwise.
Great example. And that's totally how it works, right? Like, those companies need a partner who can respond quickly to all those changes and then problem solve and take care of things.
Yeah. And I would dig into that. Like, when we talk about doing a 5 whys analysis. Okay, so why do you need me to change quickly? Well, we need to change quickly because maybe we're doing lots of different product lines. Okay, well, why are you doing lots of different product lines? Well, we're trying to reach different parts of the market. Oh, that's interesting. So what do you mean by different parts of the market? Well, we sell some cosmetics to women over 65 and a bunch of cosmetics to teenagers.
Yep.
Huh. So what if we had different label designs for the 18-year-old versus the 65-year-old? Oh, I never thought about it that way.
Sure.
Now all of a sudden you're getting to the root cause of, like, why do they need help with labels that set you up to really position yourself as the expert yourself and help that business get to accomplish the goals that they want to accomplish.
Yeah. Good. So what, and then which segment, which might be like what type of product, what type of
what kind of cosmetics companies, for example,
narrow it down a little bit.
Narrow it down.
Who cares in that company, and who else
are the people,
cares,
right? Who writes the check? Who's going to be doing visual inspections of the labels to make sure they work correctly, that the font is big enough, that it matches all the guidelines from the FDA, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and then keep going. So that's the first three, and then what are the other four?
Yeah, so those are the first three. And then, so then I think about it as like, okay, let's say we get some conversations going with the right people in those segments talking about the problem. Well, then this is where, as a salesperson, we need to find a way to keep control of the sales process. So the next two questions are when and where. So when is like, when is the next step? So like as the salesperson going into any meeting or any interaction, you should already know what is the ideal outcome for that meeting? What is the next through two or three or four steps? So using a cosmetics company, let's say you talk to their owner and they say, yeah, I think this would make sense. They might have a tendency to say, send me a brochure and I'll share it with the team. Well, if as soon as you send this your brochure, you're out of control. So instead, you sit down with the owner before the meeting starts and say, listen, definitely want to spend some time talking about what we do, ask you some questions about your problem. And if we're a fit, typically what we find is that after an initial conversation like this, it would make sense for me to talk to your technical expert so I can talk about how we make our labels so we can know whether or not they fit on your bottles. Does that make sense? And they go, yeah. So what you've done is you already know the next step and you're forecasting that, it's future pacing that allows you to keep control. So the when question is knowing when is the next step. And then the where question is just kind of knowing where you are in the sales process. Like as a seller, you should know, okay, if I've only talked to the owner, I'm still just getting things going. But if I've talked to the owner and the technical expert and the manufacturing person and the operations person, and maybe even the marketing people, now I know, okay, we've accomplished a lot of little steps. That means we're much later in the entire sales process. So when and where is just having like visibility and awareness of so where you are in the sale.
Got it. Great.
Yeah.
Keep going.
And then the last two are just why and how. So imagine let's use this example. You've marched people through your sales process. And this is where a lot of times people say, send me a proposal. This sounds great. And then you send the proposal. And you know when people get back to you after you send the proposal? I always joke and say they get back to you on the 19th. The 19th of never. That's when they get back to you. And so you have to be able to answer why and how, meaning why will they buy from you? Have you shown your prospect why you're a return on investment, not a cost? What are they going to get back by spending money with you? Because nobody has money for budget. Nobody has budget. Nobody has money for cost. Nobody has more expense. Nobody wants to take on more expenses. So it's our job as sellers to show why they would want to buy from us. And then the how is just about delivery, giving people a view of the future. Like, hey, if we work together, this is how we're going to support you. This is how we implement. This is how we train. This is how we get going. These are all the steps after the sale. And when you can answer that question, it actually helps you in the sale because it gives the buyer visibility, not as like, I'm going to sign this contract and then what happens? It's almost like showing them the work plan, the implementation plan. So the contract is just like this easy step that goes from sales process into actual implementation. So those two questions I think are the ones where you can break down that final hesitation. Because usually if people have hesitation at the end of the process, it's because they're not clear on the return on investment and they're not confident that you're going to be able to deliver for them.
So two questions come to mind. One is, what do you think about like closing culture? Like the closer, they're having the right close, they're saying the right words. Do I have
Yeah,
to go to
I actually
closing
hate the word
school?
close.
Do I don't
Yeah,
need to go to closing school?
no, I tell people I don't use the word close. I use the word convert. You convert somebody from a prospect to a customer. The reason I don't like the word close is because it implies that you're finishing something. And if you think about when you talk to a prospective customer and they say, look, we want to move forward. We'd like to get started. They don't say, hey, good job, you closed the sale. The words they use are that line is not the finishing line. It's not the close. It's actually the starting line. The sale allows you to get to work. And so I always avoid this idea of closing. And I think from a mindset standpoint, that's where the why and the how become really important as part of your sales process, because it shows your prospect that you actually care about getting the results and actually tabulating these are the return on investment you get if you use our labels versus someone else or doing them yourselves. And here's how I'm going to prove to you how we're going to support you. Because that's actually that's the outcome. They're buying the outcome, not the product. If you can show them the outcome as part of the sale, you're going to have a much better opportunity of actually making that conversion.
So we're running up on time, and I'm
Sure.
conscious of that. But what is so if a company owner goes through these steps, and I'll just leave it like this, tell me if I'm right. If a company owner goes through these steps and can write these things down and get clear on the steps in your book,
Yeah.
it makes it so much easier to then go out and hire some people, hire their first people and get them to implement and execute. But if we don't have that
Yeah.
figured out, it's really hard. There is no black magic. We're not going to have somebody come
Yeah.
on board and then be able to like just make it happen, right?
Yeah. And I suspect like if you're an owner and you're doing the selling, go back to your last 10 customers and run through this framework and just ask yourself, like, I guarantee you probably checked all 7 boxes. You just didn't realize it. And then if you compare that to sales you didn't get and do a retro on 10 that you didn't get, I bet you're going to find some gaps. You're like, oh, for these customers, we found the problem. We talked to the right people. We had control. We showed them ROI. We talked about implementation.
That's great.
Sometimes it was customer led, but either way, you answer those questions, and the ones you didn't get, you probably had some gaps. And so once you become more aware of, for every sale, we have to check these 7 boxes. What that allows you to do is know what to do in each step. And then you can hand that over to a salesperson. And that gives you almost like a rubric against which you can manage that salesperson. Because then the salesperson says, hey, boss, I got this great new sales opportunity. They want me to send a proposal I think they're going to buy.
Right.
And go, okay, cool. Well, let's just go through this rubric real fast. Did you answer all 7 questions? What's the problem we're solving? They didn't really say, but they said they were really interested.
Yeah.
Okay, who are we talking to? I talked to the director. Cool. Have you talked to the CEO over there? No. Okay, we got some work to do. So it just allows you to manage that person in a very objective way, so that that person doesn't feel like you're like finger wagging or chasing deals. You're like, hey, here's our system for analyzing a deal. That's why I love this framework so much.
You very quickly said, well, you get some conversations going. I know everybody wants to want to know about that. Oh, you just get some conversations going. That's prospecting, right? And it's could be a combination of inbound, outbound. We don't have anywhere near enough time to get into that today.
Yeah,
but
definitely not.
What is it? Is it just a mindset? You've been through these startup companies. Is it a will? It feels to me like a will or a mindset thing. Like I'm going to get some conversations. And then there are techniques and there's ways to do it, but a lot of it, I have to want to get the conversation.
Yeah, you just have to decide that. See, I think people are just, it's the typical fear of rejection. And it's like, oh, I know I should do some prospecting, but I just don't have time, or people aren't replying back to me. So, even for me in my business every day, I go through and I think about, what are my 20? Have I contacted 20 people? Have I sent connection requests on LinkedIn? Have I emailed and followed up with people that were interested before? Have I asked partners for introductions? Like, it's got to be a habit, just like that time in my calendar that's purple from 2 to 3:30. I'm going to the garage and do my training. You've got to have that time. Sales is an everyday activity. It's not like a when I feel like it activity, or when sales are really down. We've had 3 slow months and now all of a sudden we're burning cash. Oh, I guess I better go do some selling. No, it's like, it's an everyday thing. And if it's an everyday thing, you get a lot more comfortable with it, because then you don't care if you send 20 out and only get 3 replies. You're like, tomorrow I'm going to send 20 more and maybe get 2 replies, but that's cool.
Right. Yeah. Well, you said decide. I think that's it. So
yeah,
how do I
decide?
So we can get your book and we'll link to that. What else should we know about how to get in touch with you and how to start a conversation with you, Scott?
Best place to go is just go to salesqualia.com/book. Salesqualia, QUALIA.com/book. You can actually download a full copy of the book, a personal copy. It's a full complete copy in PDF format. And when you grab a copy of the book, then that will also add you to our email list. And then chances are I'll see it. Like, I'll get a little note in my inbox. I'll send you a LinkedIn connection request if you're on LinkedIn. But otherwise, there's a whole set of contact information in the book. So I would tell people, grab a copy of the book, and that can start our conversation if you're interested.
Yeah, and I always think that what we need to do is read less books, but find a handful of good ones, and then really do what the author is telling us to do. And you've made it pretty clear what we should do and what we should write down. So thanks for doing that. Scott, it's been an absolute pleasure. Always love talking to you. Thanks for joining us here for an hour.
Cool, man. Thanks, Wayne. Talk to you later.
Yeah, talk soon. Bye.
All right, bye.